Grace and peace to you, Brentwood Oaks family. Tonight we are concluding our study of the Proverbs, and I pray that this has been a blessing to you as we've listened in on these words, as you've read them yourselves. And I hope that you continue to read this. I hope this doesn't end your time with the Proverbs. Next week, we're going to hear from Travis Walters. He's going to lead us in a study of the book of Jonah, which is my personal favorite Old Testament book, and I look forward to hearing his thoughts on this incredible story. He'll have more to say about that on Sunday. But tonight we turn our attention to Proverbs chapters 26 through 31. So if you want to grab your Bibles and turn to these chapters, I want to read four or five Proverbs just to help us think about how these words apply to our own lives, and also how this applies to us as a congregation. So a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to teach a class at the Northside Church in Temple on the book of Ecclesiastes on the topic of money. And as I taught that class, the first thing I did was talk about the different types of wisdom literature. And a helpful conversation partner that I found is the Bible Project. There's a 5-minute video on wisdom literature from the Bible Project. If you just type that into YouTube or go to their website, you'll find it. It's extraordinary. It's very helpful. But one of the things that they do is they define the Proverbs, and they really talk about the differences between the Proverbs and other wisdom literature. The Proverbs are not promises. They are not guarantees. The Proverbs are probabilities. Proverbs resides in a world of order and stability. Proverbs lives in the world as the way it should be. If the world is a just world, then the Proverbs should be lived out accordingly. So the way we should read Proverbs is, if A happens, then B naturally will follow. But as we are well aware, we do not live in a Proverbs world, which is why we have the other wisdom literature books, the book of Ecclesiastes, and especially the book of Job. Job really disintegrates the idea that we live in a Proverbs world. That's really what the book of Job is about. That's what Job and his friends are wrestling with, and especially Job's friends. They see Job's suffering, and they can't get their mind around the fact that they don't live in a Proverbs world. They say Job is suffering because of some secret sin. Because in a Proverbs world, good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. And what the book of Job does for us is it introduces that element of chaos into the world of order. This fallen world we live in, it doesn't always work out so neatly. And so in our fallen world, often the wicked prosper, and often the righteous suffer, which may bring to our minds the question, well, why read the Proverbs? Well, just the fact that we don't live in a Proverbs world doesn't diminish the importance and really the necessity of reading and breathing in the Proverbs, because certainly listening and discerning wisdom increases our chances for order in a world of chaos. And there is truth in every single proverb. But we begin by recognizing that we don't really live in a Proverbs world. And that's going to impact the way that we read Proverbs. Applying the Proverbs is contextually based. It depends on our life situation, depends on our circumstances. We hear certain Proverbs differently than we would 5-10 years ago, depending on our life experience. I think a great example of this and how to read the Proverbs comes from Proverbs chapter 26, verses 4 through 5. It's a puzzle. It's a riddle. Listen to these words. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will be like him yourself. This is Proverbs 26, verse 4. Do not answer a fool according to his folly. But then listen to verse 5. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. So which is it? Do we answer a fool according to his folly or not? Well, this depends on, well, this may be the best example we have on from the book of Proverbs with that answer. It depends. It really does depend. It depends on our relationship with the fool. It depends on our influence over the fool, or the fool's influence and impact on us. And it takes patience and practice and prayer to discern how to engage a fool in his folly. And I think this speaks an important word for us in the year 2020, especially for those of us who are on social media. Let's take Facebook, for example. In the world of Facebook, you do run across foolish statements. You run across a lot of folly, and you have that moment when you read these certain posts, you see these certain articles, and you have that moment of decision. Do I engage the folly or not? And I would caution us against engaging the fool in his folly. I'm dumbfounded by so many of the posts that I see, and especially brothers and sisters in Christ who engage one another in a very public way. They air their laundry out for everyone to see. And I would encourage you, if you run across foolishness, don't put it out there in public. Private message the person. Pick up the phone and call them. Ask questions. That's really what Mel's class has been about over the last several Sundays. A real treasure and very timely for us as a church to engage folly, foolishness, or engage people with whom we disagree by asking questions, by being genuinely curious about their response, and then moving them toward maybe even questioning their own arrival at their answers. So don't play that game. Don't engage in a public way. When you put people on the defense like that in a very public forum, you're not going to get well-reasoned response. And even with yourself, soon it's going to turn into something that's more emotional, and it becomes more about a game of saving face than actually talking through differences of opinion. And I think we always have to be open to the fact that we might be the fool. So be careful with that. And I think Proverbs 26, verses 4 and 5 really help us in pushing the pause button before we jump into the fray and thinking about better ways to engage a fool in his folly. Closely related to this idea is another proverb that speaks to me personally. I believe it speaks a word to the church, and that is Proverbs 27, verse 6, which says, "Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses." Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Well, this proverb speaks to true friendship, something that I think is in short supply here in the year 2020. And before I go into more on this proverb, let's hear a similar proverb, one that probably most of us are familiar with, Proverbs 27, verse 17. "As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another." Again, we're talking about friendship. What is true friendship? Is it not someone who can tell you the truth about yourself? We really do need to surround ourselves with truth tellers, people whom we can trust, people with whom we can have the kind of relationship that is open to a point where we can even give each other not some harsh criticism, but constructive feedback, and sometimes confrontational. It would be easy for us to surround ourselves with a bunch of yes men or yes women who tell us what we want to hear. We can get in our own echo chambers and dismiss any criticism, any differences of opinion. But if we do this, what we're doing is we're stunting our own growth. So the last thing we need to do is surround ourselves with those who enable us, and maybe they don't have our best interest, our need for growth and maturity in their hearts and in their minds. I remember earlier on in my preaching here at Brentwood Oaks, I preached a sermon, and I had one of my mentors, friends, but someone with whom I have just the utmost respect. And this person approached me privately, and he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I appreciate your preaching so much, but you missed the mark on that sermon." And I got to tell you that. And when I heard that, I can tell you that that hurt. That was a wound. But it was a wound from a friend. And wounds from friends, true friends, can be trusted. And I trusted his voice, and that led me to some introspection on not just that sermon, but on a lot of my preaching up to that point. And that was a real sharpening moment. And it took courage for this friend to say that, but I'm so grateful for that. It was a gift. So my question for all of us at Brentwood Oaks, do you have a friend like that? Do you have a set of friends like that? Do you have a truth teller who can show a mirror, bring a mirror to you and show you, reveal who you are, your true self? Because self-deception is very powerful, and it's very easy to gloss over our flaws. It takes a true friend to show a mirror to us and say, this is who you really are. This is where you're at. This is where you need to grow. And such a friend is a gift from God. Well, there are so many proverbs from this section. I'll highlight two more. One comes from the sayings of Agur in Proverbs 30, verses 7 through 9. I think this one is quickly becoming one of my favorite proverbs, if not my favorite proverb. Proverbs 30, verses 7 through 9. Two things I ask you, O Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me, and give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of God. I came across this proverb a few years ago in a class that Keith Stanglin taught. He was teaching on the Lord's Prayer, and he was teaching on that line, give us this day our daily bread. And he read this verse as a possible inspiration for Jesus in giving that line, give us this day our daily bread. And I think there's certainly merit to that possibility. It's a beautiful proverb of contentment and the dangers of both wealth and poverty. It's interesting that the Bible speaks so often about the dangers of wealth and the complacency that comes along with that and our lack of dependency on God. But in this proverb, we also see the temptations that come along with poverty. And so Agur asked God to lead him into kind of a sweet spot in between wealth and poverty, where his awareness of God's provision is not hampered by having too much wealth. But on the other side, he doesn't become impoverished to the point where he doesn't place his trust in God, and he begins to take matters into his own hands and steal from others. And this proverb really speaks into the relationship, our relationship with money and wealth, and that sense of stewardship that we have as the people of God. When I read this, I can't help but think of the old Leonard Skinner song, Simple Man. And it's a song about a mother who is expressing her wisdom, expressing her wishes for her son. I highly recommend that song. If you've never heard it, just look up Simple Man by Leonard Skinner, if you could spell it. And here's some lyrics from it. Forget your lust for the rich man's gold. All you need is in your soul. You can do this, oh baby, if you try. All that I want for you, my son, is to be satisfied. And her wish for her son is that he would be a simple man. Not simple in the sense of being stupid, but in the sense of learning to live a life of contentment. Well, that speaks right into what Agur is saying in Proverbs chapter 30 concerning our dependence upon God for our daily bread that nurtures that sense of contentment, that spirit of contentment. Well, I want to end our time this evening reading from the end of Proverbs 31, that famous ending, Proverbs 31, 10 through 31, about the wife of noble character. And before I read it, here are a few interesting notes. First of all, that last part of Proverbs 31, verses 10 through 31, is an acrostic poem, meaning that each line of that poem begins with a successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and that is incredibly hard. But this is inspired, this writing, and it beautifully captures this description of a woman who brings honor to her husband in the way that she conducts herself, and her character and her resourcefulness, all those things. It makes her husband so proud that he is with her. But also, and you might not be aware of this, but the chronology of our Bibles is a little different from certain versions of the Hebrew Bible. And in certain versions, the book of Ruth doesn't follow Judges. The book of Ruth follows Proverbs and this description of the woman of noble character. And so Ruth is nestled in between Proverbs and Song of Solomon. And it makes a lot of sense when you read this description. So as I read this to end our time tonight, I would encourage you to think of that story of Ruth. Ruth the Moabite. Ruth who is in the genealogy of Jesus. Ruth, this foreigner who lost her husband, but she decides that she is going to support her mother-in-law, who travels back to Israel out of her loyalty, out of her love for her mother-in-law. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. We hear that read often at weddings. Consider Ruth and her resourcefulness and how she worked the fields and how she interacted with Boaz as you hear these words from Proverbs 31. So let's hear them. Proverbs 31. Verse 10. A wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She's like the merchant ships, bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still dark. She provides food for her family and portions for her servant girls. She considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her task. She sees that her trading is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hand she holds the distaff and grasps a spindle with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hand to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for her bed. She's clothed in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchants with sashes. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive, and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the reward she's earned, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. Yeah, I think Ruth is certainly a good conversation partner with the woman of noble character there at the end of Proverbs. So we finished this Wednesday evening series on the Proverbs, and there can be no harm in continuing this series in your personal study. Read a chapter of Proverbs a day and see what God does with that. Let's end on these words from Proverbs 3. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Grace and peace to you, dear brothers and sisters at Brentwood Oaks. Press on in the fight and in the mission to be the good witnesses to the Lord Jesus Christ and to walk in wisdom. Blessings.